The indigenous societies of North America, despite the distances and different languages, showed some points of connection with cultures from other continents, not just in their cosmologies or ceremonies, but in the way they organized everyday life. Men and women defined responsibilities, exchanged expectations, and built emotional bonds that held the group together. The variety of environments and historical paths created striking contrasts, which make simple labels impossible. Even so, noticing recurring patterns helps us understand how roles and identities were negotiated, the main theme of this reflection. In different indigenous peoples of North America, rules about intimacy shaped daily routines and beliefs. Some communities restricted contact between men and women during certain times. Others did the opposite. Among the Apache, harvesting agave required abstinence. They feared that an encounter could affect the fruit's taste. In some villages, people avoided closeness before long journeys, seen as a way to save energy for the road. The Comanche, on the other hand, followed a different logic. Before expeditions, they spent time with their partners, valuing presence and connection. Even so, the meaning given to intimacy varied a lot. For some groups, it was mainly about conceiving children. For others, the focus was on male pleasure, leaving the female side in the background. There were also rules visible in everyday life. Among the so-called Shoshone Comanche, women's behavior in public spaces was strictly watched. Sitting without keeping their knees together could lead to harsh punishment. These contrasts show there wasn't a single rule but many different cultural arrangements, shaped by contexts, goals, and beliefs that governed bodies, emotions, and expectations, influencing everything from work and travel to home life and a person's public image. In different indigenous peoples, intimacy wasn't limited to modesty rules and, in certain contexts, took on a ritual role. Among the Mandan, for example, they held ceremonies dedicated to the buffalo in which adult women covered in hides served food to the elders. After the meal, they led them into the woods, where the encounters had symbolic meaning, to renew alliances, ask for abundance, and strengthen the group's continuity, rather than to seek immediate pleasure. Each participant was expected to attend to several elders in one night. In practice, the age of many men limited the act, and the gesture was replaced by prayers for a good hunting season. Another feature of these rituals was the absence of kissing, seen as a way to protect future generations. At the same time, internal rules were strict regarding sexual violence. In many tribes, rape was considered the gravest crime and could bring extreme punishment. Even so, settlements by agreement were common. The victim or their family could accept substantial compensation, ending the conflict without bloodshed. These choices reveal cosmologies where the body, hunting, and justice formed a single field of obligations, guided by rituals and the pursuit of community balance. In different peoples, conflicts tied to sexuality and power were ruled by their own customs, often unfair to women. Among the Apache, there were young men who took women by force when they refused marriage. After the assault, many families, instead of demanding punishment, gave the young woman to her attacker, as if the crime had confirmed a bond. Collective pressure ended the case and reinforced the custom. Among the Zuni, the offender was judged in front of everyone. The victim decided the sentence. If she asked for death, the execution happened right there. But most of the time, she chose compensation, a solution that brought peace without challenging the logic of power. Among the Ojibwe, fear shaped relationships. Women were taught to fear attacks, and the shaman fueled that fear. He would announce the arrival of a spirit that would possess a man to assault her. Then, the shaman himself appeared and committed the act, protected by his prestige and authority. Under that spiritual disguise, violence was legitimized, making resistance almost impossible. These practices, different in form but similar in effect, show how cultural codes can turn assaults into accepted rituals, silence victims, and shield aggressors. Understanding these mechanisms is an essential step toward breaking traditions that turn abuse into a norm. In the same community, many stepdaughters endured humiliation. When shame became part of daily life, the only way out was to walk out the door and never come back. In that space, mothers and daughters also found the strength to break away from their husbands and reject the cycle of violence that ruled their relationships. That decision took courage, support, and a plan to build a new life. In other societies, the logic was different. Among native peoples of North America, there wasn't a word equivalent to prostitution in the Western sense. Local customs, however, could look similar to outsiders. Among the Creek, the key idea was autonomy. Even when married, a woman had control over her own body, and if she wanted, could spend the night with a visitor without breaking any rules. In other tribes, the arrangement took different forms. In Salish society, elders chose the people with whom a group of women, single or married, would share a bed. Travelers were also welcomed by being offered the hospitality of a wife, a gesture seen as forming an alliance, not as a transaction. From the inside, it was its own kind of ethics, ways of managing desire, care, and belonging. From the outside, the Western lens turned those differences into labels. Altogether, these examples reveal a common thread. Faced with oppression or differing norms, women asserted their choices and redrew boundaries, creating room for relationships guided by mutual agreement. In different indigenous communities, sexual relationships followed their own rules. In some groups, the choice didn't belong to the woman. The men decided who would spend the night with the visitor, a practice similar to that of the Omaha, who punished anyone who turned the custom into exploitation. Among the Papago, festivals made room for temporary bonds. Certain women had the role, during rituals, of welcoming outsiders, creating connections valid only for the duration of the celebration. From those occasions, young couples also emerged. Some broke up by mourning, others continued and became lasting partnerships with a home and children. When a relationship didn't last, the children were embraced as part of the community without any label to set them apart, and grew up surrounded by relatives and allies. Among the Pima, neighbors of the Papago, there was a group of women known for their ability to attract partners. They faced no disapproval. They could choose a more conventional path or wait for the next festival, renewing their chance for a new encounter. This back and forth was part of the community's calendar and carried no shame because honor was defined by belonging and mutual care, not by the shape of one's relationships. In many indigenous societies of North America, married life allowed some flexibility in how men's and women's roles were divided, but adultery almost always brought a harsh response. There were a few exceptions. Among the Hopi, a man could take a second wife in addition to the first, an arrangement accepted within their own rules. Outside of that, strict laws prevailed, with punishments that affected not only unfaithful wives but, in some groups, also husbands. The root of this strictness lay in how marriage was formed. Before the union, the groom offered gifts to the bride's family, a gesture that was more than symbolic, as it reinforced the idea of ownership over the bond. Breaking that pact was seen as both a betrayal and an offense that the community had the duty to punish. Among the Comanche, for example, accused women could be expelled from the group or sold into slavery. Others faced public punishment. Their heads were shaved, they were beaten, or sent back to their families marked by disgrace. In extreme cases, they were tied to trees and left to their fate in the wilderness, where predators and the elements turned the sentence into a warning for everyone. In this way, controlling fidelity served to protect alliances, regulate the flow of goods, and maintain the group's social order. In some indigenous communities of North America, suspicion of betrayal wasn't something only husbands dealt with. Among the Shoshone, when a woman believed she was being deceived, she would confront her rival in public and throw mud at her, marking the conflict in front of everyone. There were also extreme outcomes. In moments of anger or jealousy, some women took their husbands' lives. There was rarely any formal punishment, but the price came in another way. Social isolation became the sentence. No one was willing to build a new home with them, and their support network slowly faded away. Without a partner, without resources, and without anyone to help care for the home and children, survival became fragile and often led to a tragic end. This set of rules, spoken or unspoken, shaped behavior and revealed the link between jealousy, honor, and survival. By looking at these practices, we can see how the community handled intimate conflicts and defined, through the harshness of daily life, the limits of what it considered acceptable.